Maya Rodriguez stood at the edge of the training platform, watching as her fellow cadets prepared for the day's tests. The metal floor beneath her feet hummed with energy, and the artificial lights above cast long shadows across the massive training bay. Around her, beings from across the galaxy moved with purpose and confidence that she could only dream of having. The Galactic Military Academy on Kepler Station was home to the best warriors from dozens of worlds. Each species brought their own strengths, their own natural gifts that had earned them respect among the stars. Maya looked at her hands, small and pale compared to the claws and chitinous plates surrounding her, and wondered what gifts humans were supposed to bring to this place. A deep rumble shook the floor as Commander Zarkt H, a massive Krillian with armor-like skin, stepped onto the platform. His forearms moved independently as he adjusted the training equipment, each limb as thick as Maya's torso. His compound eyes swept across the assembled cadets, lingering on Maya for just a moment. Longer than the others. "Today we test your natural abilities," the commander announced, his voice carrying easily across the vast space. "No equipment, no enhancements, just what your species has given you. The first test is strength." Maya's stomach tightened. She had known this day would come, but watching it unfold felt like watching a slow disaster she couldn't prevent. The other cadets moved toward the testing area with eager anticipation. While Maya followed reluctantly behind, Cadet Thaxel went first. The Krillian male approached a massive steel beam that looked like it could crush a small vehicle. His secondary arms braced against the platform while his primary arms wrapped around the beam. With a grunt that sounded like grinding stone, he lifted the beam above his head and held it there for the required 10 seconds. The watching cadets clicked their mandibles in approval. Next came Zara, a Zephyrian with silver fur that seemed to shimmer in the light. She chose a beam half the size of Thaxel S, but her lean muscles coiled like springs as she lifted it smoothly overhead. Her cat-like eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she set it down without any sign of strain. One by one, the other cadets took their turns. Even Kelrun, who came from a species Maya had never heard of before arriving at the academy, managed to lift a beam that would have been impossible for most Earth construction equipment to handle. Then it was Maya's turn. She approached the selection of beams, each one marked with weight measurements that made her heart sink. The smallest beam weighed nearly 300 pounds. On Earth, she had been considered strong for a human woman, but here, surrounded by beings who could bench press small vehicles, her strength seemed laughable. She wrapped her arms around the smallest beam and pulled. The metal was cold against her skin, and for a moment it didn't move at all. Maya gritted her teeth and tried again, feeling the burn in her muscles as she fought to lift even one end of the beam. Finally, with a tremendous effort that left her shaking, she managed to raise the beam to chest height. It was nowhere near the overhead position required for the test, but it was all she could manage. The silence that followed was worse than any criticism. Maya set the beam down and stepped back, her face burning with embarrassment. She could feel the other cadets' eyes on her, could sense their confusion and disappointment. This was the best that humanity had to offer. "Adequate effort, Commander," Zarkt H said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "Next test, speed and agility." The agility course was a nightmare of moving platforms, swinging obstacles, and narrow passages that required split-second timing. Maya watched as Zara flowed through the course like liquid mercury, her movements so fast they were almost a blur. The Zephyrian completed the entire course in under 30 seconds. Landing gracefully at the finish line without even breathing hard. Thaxel took a different approach, using his massive strength to simply power through obstacles that would have stopped other species. Where Zara had dodged, he absorbed impacts that would have shattered bones. His time was slower, but no less impressive for its display of raw determination. When Maya's turn came, she found herself facing obstacles designed for beings far more physically capable than humans. The first platform was positioned at a height that required her to jump with everything she had just to reach it. The swinging barriers moved too fast for her reflexes, and the narrow passages seemed to close in on her like a trap. She made it through the course, but it took her nearly 3 minutes, 5 times longer than Zara's record. By the time she reached the finish line, she was gasping for breath and her uniform was torn in several places. The other cadets had already moved on to discussing the next test, having apparently written off her performance as exactly what they had expected. The final test was mental processing, tactical scenarios that required quick thinking and strategic planning. Maya felt a flutter of hope as she approached the testing station. Humans were supposed to be good at this kind of thing, weren't they? Creativity, adaptability, thinking outside the box. The first scenario appeared on the screen, a complex battle situation with multiple variables and possible outcomes. Maya studied it carefully, considering different approaches and trying to find the optimal solution. Around her, she could hear the other cadets finishing their tests with satisfied clicks and chittering sounds. Vex single quotes done. A Vorthan with pale blue skin and large cranial ridges completed his test in less than a minute. His species had evolved enhanced neural processing, allowing them to consider multiple possibilities simultaneously. What would take Maya several minutes to work through, he could calculate almost instantly. Maya finally submitted her answer after 4 minutes of careful consideration. She had chosen a strategy that she thought was clever and unconventional, but when the results appeared on the screen, she saw that it was marked as suboptimal. The suggested solution was one she had considered but dismissed as too risky. As the testing session ended, Maya overheard the other cadets talking among themselves. They spoke in their own languages, but the universal translators made their words painfully clear. "The human is weaker than I expected," Thaxel rumbled to his companion. "I had heard stories about their species, but this is disappointing." "Perhaps the stories were exaggerated," Vexton replied, his voice carrying the cold logic of his people. "It would not be the first time a new species was oversold to the Academy." Zara, who had been quiet during the earlier conversation, finally spoke. She tried her best. "That counts for something, does it?" Vexton asked. "In real combat, effort without results leads to death. Can we trust our lives to someone who cannot even lift a basic training weight?" Maya walked away from the group, her cheeks burning with shame. She had known this would be difficult, but she hadn't been prepared for how completely outclassed she would be. Every other cadet had natural advantages that made them suited for military service. What did humans have? What could they possibly contribute to an organization that valued strength, speed, and intelligence above all else? That night, Maya lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Her body ached from the physical tests, and her mind raced with doubts about her presence at the academy. Outside her window, the stars wheeled slowly past as the station continued its orbit around the gas giant below. She thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who were counting on her to prove their worth among the galactic community. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new opportunities to fail, and new reminders of how inadequate she was compared to the other species. But something deep inside her, something stubbornly human, refused to give up. She might be the weakest cadet in the academy, but she was still here. She was still fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The equipment bay buzzed with activity as cadets prepared for their first combat simulation training. Maya stood before a rack of gear that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. But here it was standard issue for every military cadet in the galaxy. The exosuit hanging before her was a marvel of engineering, designed to enhance the natural abilities of any species that wore it. "Each suit is calibrated for optimal performance," explained Instructor Vextar, a scarred Krillian veteran whose left arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic. "The neural interface will connect directly to your brain, allowing for faster reaction times and tactical coordination with your team. The energy weapons are synchronized to your suit's power core for maximum efficiency." Maya reached out to touch the suit's surface. The material felt strange under her fingers, neither metal nor fabric, but something in between. According to the specifications, it was made from advanced polymers that could absorb impacts that would crush unprotected flesh. For beings like the Krillians, who already had natural armor, it provided additional protection. For humans, it was supposed to be the difference between life and death. "Suit up, cadets," Instructor Vexstar commanded. "We begin combat drills." In 20 minutes, Maya watched as the other cadets donned their equipment with practiced ease. Thaxel's massive frame fit perfectly into his suit, the servos whirring as they synchronized with his movements. Zara's suit was sleeker, built for speed rather than protection, and it seemed to flow around her like a second skin. Even Vexton, despite his species' focus on mental rather than physical abilities, moved confidently in his gear. Maya's suit was different. Where the others had been customized for their species, hers was a standard template, the closest thing to a universal fit that the engineers could manage. The problem was that there was no such thing as a universal fit, and humans were not the baseline species that the equipment had been designed around. The moment Maya stepped into the suit, she knew something was wrong. The leg servos were too long, forcing her to walk with an awkward gait. The arm sections were too wide, making precise movements nearly impossible. The helmet, designed for the larger cranial capacity of most galactic species, sat loosely on her head and blocked part of her peripheral vision. "Adjustment period is normal," Instructor Vexstar said, noticing her struggle. "The suit will learn your movement patterns and compensate accordingly." But as Maya tried to walk across the equipment bay, she found that the suit's attempts to help only made things worse. The servos anticipated movements she wasn't making and failed to respond to movements she was. When she tried to pick up her assigned weapon, the suit's strength enhancement kicked in at the wrong moment, nearly causing her to launch the rifle across the room. The neural interface was even more problematic. The moment the helmet's connections made contact with her skull, Maya felt a sharp pain shoot through her head. The interface was trying to establish a link with her brain, but human neural patterns were different from those of the species the system had been designed for. Instead of the smooth integration that the other cadets experienced, Maya felt like someone was driving nails into her temples. "System integration complete," announced the suit's artificial voice, but Maya could barely hear it over the ringing in her ears. The heads-up display flickered erratically, showing information that seemed to shift and blur every time she tried to focus on it. "First exercise, basic movement drills," Instructor Vexstar announced. "Move through the obstacle course while maintaining weapon readiness. This is not a speed trial. Focus on coordination between your natural abilities and the suit's enhancements." Maya lined up with the other cadets at the starting line, her vision swimming from the neural interface's attempts to sync with her brain. The obstacle course looked simple enough, a series of barriers to jump over, walls to climb, and targets to engage with the energy weapons. She had run similar courses during her training on Earth, but never while wearing a suit of powered armor. The signal to begin came as a soft chime through the CUM system. Maya took her first step and immediately stumbled as the suit's leg servos overcompensated for her movement. Around her, the other cadets moved with fluid grace, their suits perfectly synchronized with their intentions. Thaxel bounded over barriers that would have been impossible for his species to clear naturally. While Zara seemed to dance through the course with inhuman speed, Maya struggled to reach the first obstacle, a waist-high barrier that should have been trivial to cross. When she tried to jump, the suit's enhancement kicked in too late, launching her awkwardly over the barrier and causing her to land hard on the other side. The impact rattled her teeth and sent fresh spikes of pain through her skull from the neural interface. The weapon handling was even worse. Maya's energy rifle was a marvel of galactic engineering, capable of firing bursts of concentrated plasma that could cut through steel. But the weapon's grip was designed for hands different from human ones, and the suit's targeting system kept trying to compensate for movements that felt natural to her but confused the software. When she finally reached the first target, Maya raised her weapon and tried to fire. The rifle's safety systems engaged, detecting that her grip was improper according to its programming. By the time she managed to convince the weapon to fire, her shot went wide, missing the target entirely. The recoil, dampened by the suit's stabilizers, felt wrong and threw off her natural shooting stance. Weapon malfunction, Maya muttered, trying to adjust her grip. But the rifle's systems were working perfectly. They just weren't designed for human hands. Behind her, she could hear the other cadets finishing the course with smooth efficiency. Their weapons fired in controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark with mechanical precision. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful. Everything that Maya's were not. By the time Maya reached the end of the course, she was exhausted and frustrated. The neural interface had given her a constant headache. The suit had fought her every movement, and her weapon had misfired more times than it had fired correctly. She stood at the finish line, breathing hard inside her helmet, while the other cadets had already moved on to discussing their performance. "Adequate effort," Instructor Vextar said, the same words he had used after her natural ability tests. But this time, Maya could hear the disappointment in his voice. The suit was supposed to level the playing field to give her the same advantages as the other cadets. Instead, it had only highlighted how different she was from everyone else. The team exercises were even more challenging. Maya found herself assigned to a squad with Zara, Thaxel, and Kelran for a simulated urban combat scenario. The goal was simple: work together to clear a building of hostile targets while minimizing casualties and collateral damage. The moment they entered the simulated building, Maya knew she was in trouble. The neural interface was supposed to allow seamless communication between squad members, sharing tactical information and coordinating movements. For the other cadets, it worked perfectly. Maya could see their positions highlighted on her display, could access their status information, and could receive their tactical updates. But when she tried to communicate back, the system struggled to interpret her thoughts. Her messages came through garbled or delayed, and her tactical assessments were filtered through translation software that didn't quite understand human reasoning patterns, where the other cadets could share complex strategies with a thought. Maya had to resort to verbal communication that felt clumsy and slow. The first room they entered contained 3 simulated enemies. Zara and Thaxel moved with perfect coordination, their actions synchronized through the neural link. Zara flanked left while Thaxel drew fire from the center, allowing Kelran to advance from the right. It was a textbook maneuver, executed with mechanical precision. Maya tried to support from the rear, but her weapon jammed at the crucial moment. The energy rifle's power coupling had loosened during her struggles with the obstacle course, and now it couldn't maintain a stable charge. While her squadmates engaged the enemy, Maya found herself fumbling with her equipment, trying to perform field repairs that should have been automatic. "Rodriguez, we need covering fire," Zara's voice crackled through the comm system. "Working." "On it," Maya replied, but her weapon chose that moment to discharge accidentally, sending a plasma bolt into the ceiling and showering the room with sparks. The suit systems registered the misfire and temporarily locked down her weapon as a safety precaution. By the time Maya got her rifle working again, the engagement was over. Her squadmates had cleared the room without her help, and she could see the disappointment in their body language even through their suits. Armor plating, the pattern continued throughout the exercise. Maya's equipment failed her at every critical moment. Her suit fought against her natural instincts, and her weapons seemed to have a mind of their own. When the simulation ended, their squad had achieved the objective, but Maya knew she had contributed nothing to their success. In the debriefing room, the other cadets removed their helmets and discussed their performance. Maya sat quietly in the corner, still struggling with the connections on her suit. The final combat assessment arrived like a storm that everyone could see coming but no one could stop. Maya stood in the equipment bay at dawn, watching technicians make last-minute adjustments to the gear that would determine her fate. The 3-day war game was designed to test everything the cadets had learned, pushing them to their absolute limits in a simulation that felt more real than many actual battles. Commander Zarkt H stood before the assembled cadets, his forearms moving as he gestured toward the massive holographic display behind him. The simulation showed a fortified mountain complex surrounded by hostile terrain, with defensive positions that would challenge even the most skilled warriors. Your mission is simple, the commander announced, his voice echoing off the metal. Walls, capture and hold Firebase Delta for 72 hours. The enemy will throw everything they have at you, and you will respond with everything you have learned here. This is not a training exercise. This is as close to real combat as we can make it without actual death. Maya felt her stomach tighten as she looked at the tactical display. The fortress was a nightmare of overlapping fields of fire, automated defenses, and natural barriers that would funnel any assault into killing zones. Even with their advanced equipment and training, it would be a brutal fight. Squad assignments are posted, Commander Zarkdage continued. You have 1 hour to prepare. Dismissed. Maya found her name on the duty roster and felt her heart sink. She had been assigned to Alpha Squad, one of the primary assault teams that would lead the initial attack. Her squad mates were some of the best cadets in the academy, Zara with her lightning-fast reflexes, Thaxel with his unstoppable strength, and Kelran with his tactical brilliance. They were counting on her to pull her weight in what would be the most important test of their military careers. The first day of the exercise began before sunrise. Maya's squad moved through the simulated terrain in the pre-dawn darkness, their suits' night vision systems painting the world in shades of green and silver. Around them, the other squads took their positions. Preparing for a coordinated assault that had been planned down to the second, Maya struggled to keep up with her squad mates' pace. The rocky terrain was treacherous, and her exosuit servos kept overcompensating for her movements, causing her to stumble over obstacles that the others navigated with ease. Her weapon felt wrong in her hands, the grip too large and the balance off, making it difficult to move quickly while maintaining readiness. Rodriguez, close up the formation, Zara's voice crackled through the comm system. You're falling behind. Maya pushed harder, forcing her protesting muscles to work against the suit's poorly calibrated systems. She could see the other 3 members of her squad moving like a well-oiled machine, their equipment working in perfect harmony with their natural abilities. They flowed over the terrain like water, silent and deadly, while Maya crashed through it like a wounded animal. The assault began with a coordinated artillery strike that lit up the sky with simulated explosions. Maya's squad was supposed to use the cover of the bombardment to advance to their first objective, a communications tower that controlled the fortress's early warning systems. It should have been a simple mission: get in, plant the charges, get out. Instead, it became Maya's first major failure of the exercise. As they approached the tower, Maya's suit malfunctioned, its sensors detecting threats that weren't there and broadcasting false warnings to the rest of the squad. The confusion lasted only seconds, but it was enough to alert the simulated defenders to their presence. Contact front, Thaxel shouted as energy bolts began raining down from the tower's defensive positions. Rodriguez, we need covering fire. On the left flank. Maya raised her weapon and squeezed the trigger, but nothing happened. The rifle's safety systems had engaged again, detecting her improper grip and refusing to fire. She fumbled with the controls, trying to override the safety while plasma bolts sizzled past her head. Rodriguez, where's that covering fire? Kelran's voice was tight with stress as he and the others took cover behind a fallen log. Working on it, Maya replied, but her weapon chose that moment to discharge accidentally, sending a bolt of energy into the ground at her feet. The suit's systems registered the misfire and temporarily shut down her weapon as a safety precaution. By the time Maya got her rifle working again, the moment had passed. Thaxel had been forced to expose himself to enemy fire to provide the covering fire that she should have given, and the simulated wound indicators on his suit showed that he had taken several hits. That would have been fatal in real combat. They completed the mission, but barely. The charges were placed and the tower destroyed, but the cost had been too high. Maya's failures had forced her squad mates to take unnecessary risks, and their assault had taken twice as long as planned. What happened back there? Zara asked, during their tactical debrief. Her voice was controlled, but Maya could hear the frustration underneath. Equipment malfunction, Maya said quietly. The weapon safety systems keep engaging at the wrong times. Equipment malfunctions can be fatal, Kelrin pointed out. We need to be able to count on each other out there. Maya nodded, unable to meet their eyes. She knew they were right, but knowing didn't make it any easier to accept. She was letting down not just herself, but the 3 cadets who had to depend on her to watch their backs. The second day brought more of the same. Maya's squad was assigned to hold a strategic choke point against a simulated enemy counterattack. The position was strong, with good cover and overlapping fields of fire, but it required precise coordination to maintain an effective defense. Maya took her position on the squad's left flank, her weapon trained on the approach route that intelligence said the enemy would use. For the first hour, everything was quiet. The morning sun climbed higher, heating the air inside her suit until sweat ran down her face and fogged her helmet's display. Then the attack came. Simulated enemy forces poured out of the tree line, their weapons blazing as they charged toward the defensive position. Maya's squadmates responded with disciplined fire, their shots finding their marks with mechanical precision. The neural interface allowed them to coordinate their fire, concentrating on the most dangerous targets while avoiding friendly fire incidents. Maya tried to join the fight, but her neural interface was acting up again. The connection kept cutting in and out, leaving her isolated from the tactical network that her squadmates relied on. She could see the enemy approaching, but she couldn't tell which targets her teammates were engaging or what their tactical priorities were. She fired at the closest enemy soldier, but her shot went wide. The weapon's targeting system was trying to compensate for what it thought was poor marksmanship, but its corrections were based on assumptions about human anatomy that were wrong. The result was a weapon that seemed to have a mind of its own, shooting everywhere except where Maya aimed. "Rodriguez, you're hitting nothing but dirt over there," Thaxel called out. "Concentrate your fire on the heavy weapons team." Maya tried to follow his instructions, but she couldn't identify the heavy weapons team through her malfunctioning display. The helmet's heads-up display was flickering again, showing false target markers and outdated tactical information. By the time she figured out which enemy soldiers Thaxel was talking about, they had already been eliminated by Zara's precise shooting. The worst moment came when Maya's exosuit locked up completely. The servos that controlled her legs froze in place, trapping her in a half-crouched position behind her cover. She was stuck, unable to move or even shift her position to get a better angle on the enemy. "I'm immobilized," she reported over the COM system. "Suit malfunction, trying to reset." But the reset procedure took precious minutes, and by the time Maya's suit was working again, the enemy assault had been repelled. Her squadmates had held the position without her help, carrying her weight once again while she struggled with equipment that seemed determined to fail at the worst possible moments. That evening, Maya overheard a conversation that cut deeper than any official reprimand could have. She was sitting alone in the mess hall, picking at her food while the other cadets celebrated their successful defense of the choke point. The voices came from the table behind her, where several cadets were discussing the day's events. "The human is going to get someone killed," one voice said. Maya recognized it as belonging to Vexton, the cold logic of his species evident in every word. "She's trying her best," another voice replied. It was Zara, defending her as she had before. "Her best is not good enough," Vexton continued. "In real combat, good intentions do not stop enemy bullets. Her equipment failures are not random, they are consistent. She is not capable of using our technology effectively." "Maybe she needs more training," Zara suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "How much training does it take to not shoot?" "At your own feet?" asked a third voice, one Maya didn't recognize. "She has been here for months, and she is getting worse, not better." Maya stood up quietly and left the mess hall, her appetite gone. She walked through the corridors of the academy, past training rooms where other cadets practiced with weapons. That worked perfectly for them. Past classrooms where they studied tactics that assumed their equipment would function when needed. The final day of the wargame assessment arrived with the cold light of artificial dawn. Maya stood in the equipment bay, staring at the exosuit that hung before her like a mechanical prison. Around her, the other cadets prepared for what would be their last chance to prove themselves worthy of graduation from the academy. The individual combat assessment was different from the team exercises. Each cadet would face an artificial intelligence opponent programmed to match their abilities and training level. It was meant to be a fair test, where success depended purely on skill rather than equipment advantages or team coordination. Maya reached out and touched the suit's surface, feeling the smooth polymer beneath her fingers. The same suit had failed her countless times over the past 3 days. The servos that fought her movements, the neural interface that gave her splitting headaches, the weapons that refused to fire when she needed them most. All of it designed to help her, all of it making her weaker instead of stronger. Final individual assessments begin in 30 minutes, announced Instructor Vexstar, his scarred face showing no emotion as he surveyed the assembled cadets. Each of you will face an opponent calibrated to your demonstrated abilities. Success requires you to defeat the AI within the allotted time frame. Maya watched as the other cadets began suiting up with practiced efficiency. Thaxel's massive frame slid into his exosuit like it was a second skin, the servos humming as they synchronized with his movements. Zara's sleeker suit flowed around. Her small form, the speed enhancement systems already beginning their calibration routines. Even Vexton, despite his species' focus on mental rather than physical abilities, moved confidently as his suit's tactical systems came online. Maya stood frozen, her hands hovering over her own equipment. The helmet sat on its rack, its neural interface ports gleaming under the artificial lights. Just looking at it made her head ache in anticipation of the pain it would cause. The weapon beside it looked functional enough, but she knew it would jam or misfire at the worst possible moment. Something wrong, Cadet Rodriguez? Instructor Vexstar approached, his compound eyes reflecting concern. Over the past few days, he had watched her struggle with equipment that should have made her stronger. He had seen her fail again and again, not from lack of effort, but from a fundamental incompatibility between human physiology and galactic military technology. Maya looked up at the instructor, then back at the equipment that had betrayed her so many times. The other cadets were almost ready, their suits powered up and weapons calibrated. Soon they would head to the testing chambers where artificial opponents waited to challenge them in fair combat. Fair combat. The words echoed in Maya's mind as she stared at the exosuit. How could it be fair when the very equipment meant to help her only made her clumsy and slow? How could it be fair when the neural interface left her isolated from tactical information while giving her debilitating headaches? How could it be fair when her weapons worked perfectly for everyone else but malfunctioned constantly in her hands? Instructor Vexstar, Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of charging power cells and warming servos. The Krillian instructor tilted his head, mandibles clicking softly. Yes, Cadet. Maya took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside her as she spoke the words that had been building in her mind for days. Can I try without the gear? The equipment bay fell silent. Even the background hum of the machinery seemed to pause as every cadet turned to stare at Maya. Thaxel's massive head swiveled toward her, his compound eyes wide with surprise. Zara's delicate features showed confusion, while Vexton's blue-tinged skin seemed to pale even further. Instructor Vexstar stood perfectly still for a long moment, as if the words hadn't quite registered in his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the careful tone of someone trying to understand an impossible request. Without the gear, he repeated slowly. Cadet Rodriguez, the equipment is designed to enhance your natural abilities. Without it, you would be at an even greater disadvantage than you already face? Maya nodded, understanding the logic behind his words, but feeling something deeper that she couldn't quite explain. For months, she had struggled with technology that was supposed to make her better, but only made her worse. She had watched herself fail again and again, while wearing equipment that worked perfectly for every other species in the galaxy. I understand that, sir, Maya replied, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. But the equipment doesn't work right for me. It fights against everything I try to do. Maybe I'd do better without it. The other cadets exchanged glances. their expressions ranging from bewilderment to something that might have been pity. Thaxel stepped forward, his mechanical voice carrying genuine concern. Maya, the AI opponent, is programmed to match your abilities while fully equipped, he said, using her first name for the first time since they had met. Without the suit, you would have no protection, no enhancement, no tactical support. It would be suicide. Zara nodded in agreement, her silver fur rippling as she moved. The combat chamber is designed for armored opponents. The AI will be using weapons that could seriously hurt you without protection. Even Kelrin, who had barely spoken to Maya since their disastrous team exercises, looked troubled by her request. The neural interface provides reaction time enhancement. Without it, you won't be able to dodge attacks fast enough. Maya listened to their concerns, understanding that they came from a place of genuine worry for her safety. These beings, who had grown frustrated with her failures over the past few days, were now trying to protect her from what they saw as a terrible mistake, but Maya felt something they couldn't understand. Every piece of equipment she had worn, every enhancement she had tried to use, had felt wrong. Not just poorly calibrated or badly fitted, but fundamentally incompatible with who she was as a human being. The exosuit made her clumsy because it tried to move in ways that weren't natural. For her body, the neural interface gave her headaches because it tried to think in ways that weren't natural for her mind. The weapons malfunctioned because they were designed for hands and reflexes that weren't hers. I know it sounds crazy, Maya said, looking around at the concerned faces of her fellow cadets, but I've been fighting this equipment for months. It doesn't work with me. It works against me. Maybe I'm not supposed to be trying to fight like a Krillian or a Zephyrian or a Vorthan. Maybe I'm supposed to fight like a human. Instructor Vexstar studied her with his compound eyes, and Maya could see him processing her request through the lens of his own military experience. He had been a warrior for decades, had fought in battles across the galaxy, had seen countless species adapt to galactic military technology. But he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The regulations are clear about equipment requirements, he said finally. All cadets must use standard protective gear during combat assessments. Maya felt her heart sink, but then the instructor continued. However, he said, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone, there is a provision for species-specific modifications to standard procedures. If a cadet's physiology is incompatible with standard equipment, alternative testing methods may be authorized. The other cadets looked at each other uncertainly. Alternative testing methods were almost never used, and certainly not for something as dramatic as removing all protective equipment. But Maya's case was unprecedented. No species had ever had such consistent problems with galactic military technology. Sir, Vexton interjected, his logical mind clearly struggling with the concept, removing protective equipment would increase the risk of injury exponentially. The liability protocols alone would require extensive documentation. Instructor, Vexstar nodded slowly. That is true. However, Cadet Rodriguez's current equipment compatibility issues have already made her a liability to any team she serves with. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach. Maya felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. For the first time in months, someone was willing to consider that maybe the problem wasn't her incompetence, but the fundamental mismatch between human abilities and alien technology. The AI opponent would need to be recalibrated, the instructor continued, thinking through the logistics. We cannot have it using anti-armor weapons against an unprotected target. The simulation parameters would need to be completely redesigned. That could take hours, Kelvin pointed out. The other cadets are ready to begin their assessments now. Maya looked around at her fellow cadets, seeing the mixture of concern and curiosity in their faces. They had watched her fail repeatedly while using their technology, had seen her struggle with equipment that worked perfectly for them. Now she was asking to try something that defied all logic and military protocol. I can wait, Maya said quietly. If there's even a chance that this might work, I have to try it. Instructor Vexstar was quiet for a long moment, his scarred face thoughtful as he considered the unprecedented request. Finally, he reached a decision that would change everything. "Very well, Cadet Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I will authorize an alternative testing protocol. The AI opponent will be recalibrated for unenhanced human abilities, and all anti-armor weapons will be disabled." Maya stood at the entrance to the combat chamber, wearing nothing but her standard academy uniform. The fabric felt strange against her skin after months of being encased in an exosuit, but it was a good kind of strange. She could move her arms freely, could turn her head without the restrictions of a helmet, could breathe without the recycled air of a life support system. Behind the observation window, she could see her fellow cadets gathered to watch. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity and concern as they looked at the small human who was about to face an artificial intelligence opponent with no protection except her own natural abilities. Even Instructor Vexstar stood with his arms crossed, his compound eyes reflecting uncertainty about what they were about to witness. "Combat simulation will begin in 60 seconds, announced the chamber's artificial voice. "Opponent calibration complete. All weapon systems adjusted for unenhanced human physiology." Maya flexed her fingers, feeling the joints move smoothly. Without the interference of mechanical gloves, she rolled her shoulders, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement that felt natural and unforced. For the first time in months, her body felt like it belonged to her. The chamber around her was a standard military training environment, neutral walls with scattered cover positions, multiple levels connected by ramps and stairs, and various obstacles that could be used for concealment or tactical advantage. It was designed to test a warrior's ability to use terrain, positioning, and strategy rather than just raw firepower. "Simulation beginning now," the voice announced. A section of the far wall slid open, and Maya's opponent stepped into the chamber. The AI took the form of a humanoid combat robot, roughly her size and build but clearly mechanical. Its movements were precise and calculated, each step perfectly balanced and efficient. Red sensor lights swept across the chamber as it analyzed the environment and identified its target. Maya crouched behind a low barrier, her heart pounding with anticipation rather than the dread she had felt during previous combat exercises. She watched the robot move, studying its patterns and behavior without the distraction of malfunctioning equipment or painful neural interfaces. The robot raised its weapon, a non-lethal energy projector that would register hits without causing actual injury, and began a systematic search of the chamber. Its movements followed standard military doctrine, checking each hiding spot in a logical sequence that would flush out any opponent using conventional tactics. Maya smiled. Conventional tactics were exactly what she wasn't going to use. Instead of waiting for the robot to find her, Maya moved. But she didn't move like a Krillian warrior charging into battle or a Zephyrian scout darting between cover points. She moved like a human, fluid, unpredictable, and utterly silent. The observers in the window watched in amazement as Maya seemed to flow through the chamber like water. She stayed low, using shadows and angles that the robot's sensors couldn't track effectively. Where they expected her to take cover behind obvious barriers, she slipped between them. Where it anticipated direct approaches, she found indirect routes that defied standard tactical thinking. "How is she moving like that?" Zara whispered to Thaxel, her silver fur bristling with excitement. The massive Krillian leaned forward, his compound eyes tracking Maya's progress. "She's not following any combat doctrine I recognize. It's like she's making up new rules as she goes." Maya reached a position directly behind the robot without triggering any of its proximity sensors. The AI was still searching the area where she had started, following its programming to eliminate hiding spots in sequential order. Its mechanical mind couldn't adapt to the possibility that its target had moved through spaces it hadn't considered viable routes, but Maya didn't attack immediately. Instead, she studied her opponent, watching how it moved and reacted. She noticed that the robot's head turned in specific increments, covering predetermined sectors. She saw that its weapon tracking had slight delays when switching between distant targets. Most importantly, she realized that its programming was based on fighting opponents who used Technology similar to its own, the robot completed its initial search pattern and began a more detailed sweep. Its sensors probed every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place with mechanical precision. Maya stayed one step ahead, moving through spaces too small for an armored opponent, using routes that required flexibility rather than strength. Finally, the robot's sensors locked onto her position. Maya had known it would happen eventually. She couldn't hide forever in a limited space. But she had used the time to learn everything she needed to know about her opponent. "Target acquired," the robot announced in a flat mechanical voice, raising its weapon. Maya didn't try to dodge the shot like a Zephyrian would, using pure speed to avoid the energy blast. She didn't try to absorb it like a Krillian would, trusting in armor and natural toughness. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone watching. She moved toward the robot. The energy blast passed harmlessly over her head as Maya dropped into a slide that carried her directly toward her opponent's legs. The robot's targeting system tried to track her movement, but it had been programmed to fight standing opponents, not targets that moved at ground level. Maya swept the robot's legs with a move that would have been impossible while wearing an exosuit. The mechanical opponent toppled backward, its precise balance disrupted by an attack it hadn't been programmed to expect. As it fell, Maya rolled to her feet and struck a specific point on the robot's chest, the central processing unit that controlled its motor functions. The robot hit the ground with a metallic clang and lay still, its systems shut down by the precise strike. "Combat complete," announced the chamber's voice. "Victory. Cadet Rodriguez. Time elapsed, 43 seconds. The observation window erupted in stunned silence. Maya stood over her defeated opponent, breathing hard but victorious. She looked up at the window and saw faces that reflected amazement, disbelief, and something that might have been respect. Instructor Vexstar was the first to speak, his voice carrying through the chamber's communication system. "Cadet Rodriguez, report to debriefing immediately." Maya nodded and walked toward the exit, her steps light and confident for the first time since arriving at the academy. Behind her, the mechanical opponent remained motionless on the chamber floor, defeated by tactics it had never been programmed to counter. In the debriefing room, Maya faced a panel of instructors who looked as stunned as her fellow cadets. Instructor Vexstar sat at the center of the table, his scarred face showing an expression she had never seen before, genuine amazement. "Cadet Rodriguez," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "your performance in the combat assessment was unprecedented. The AI opponent was programmed to match your previous abilities while fully equipped. Yet you defeated it in less than a minute using tactics that appear nowhere in our military databases." Maya sat straight in her chair, feeling confident for the first time in months. "Sir, I think the problem was that I was trying to fight like everyone else instead of fighting like a human." The instructor leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting interest. "Explain." Maya took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. The equipment, all the enhancements, they're designed to make every species fight the same way. But humans aren't the same as Krillians or Zephyrians or Vorthans. We have our own strengths, our own ways of thinking and moving. When I tried to use your technology, I was fighting against my own nature." Another instructor, a Vorthan with pale blue skin, spoke up. "Your tactics were highly irregular. You used approaches that violated standard military doctrine." "Yes, sir," Maya replied. "Because standard military doctrine assumes that warriors will use standard equipment and standard approaches. But what if the enemy expects that too? What if they've programmed their defenses to counter conventional tactics?" The room fell quiet as the instructors considered her words. Maya could see them processing the implications of what she had demonstrated. For generations, galactic military doctrine had focused on standardization, common equipment, common tactics, common approaches to warfare. But Maya had shown that sometimes the most effective weapon was the one that couldn't be anticipated or countered. "Cadet Rodriguez," Instructor Vexstar said finally, "I believe we owe you an apology. We have been trying to make you into something you are not, instead of helping you become the best version of what you are. Maya felt a warm glow of satisfaction spread through her chest. Thank you, sir. But I think the real lesson here is that humans might have something unique to offer the galactic military. We don't have to be the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We just have to be ourselves. Over the following weeks, Maya's performance became the talk of the academy. Her fellow cadets, who had once seen her as a liability, began to view her with new respect. Thaxel asked her to demonstrate some of her unconventional movement techniques. Zara wanted to learn how she had remained hidden from the robot's sensors. Even Vexton admitted that her tactical approach had been logically sound, if unprecedented. More importantly, the Academy's instructors began developing new training protocols specifically designed for human cadets.